You won't believe what just happened on The View. Mel Gibson stuns Whoopi Goldberg into silence. What started as an ordinary episode of The View turned into one of the most jaw-dropping moments in the show's recent history. Hollywood legend and director Mel Gibson left Whoopi Goldberg utterly speechless on live television, an unexpected moment that sent the studio audience into a frenzy. The show opened like any other: bright lights, thunderous applause, and familiar faces: Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sunny Hostin flashing well-rehearsed smiles. But beneath the surface, something was brewing. This wasn't going to be a casual celebrity sit-down. The hosts had a plan, and it wasn't friendly. With her trademark tone, Whoopi welcomed him. "Please welcome Mel Gibson to The View." Hollywood star, acclaimed director, and arguably the most controversial man in America right now. Her words were polite, but her eyes hinted at confrontation. Mel walked onto the stage with unwavering confidence. Dressed in a sleek black suit, his piercing blue eyes swept across the room. He took his seat with a calm, knowing smile. The tension was unmistakable. This wasn't just an interview, it was a showdown. Before we dive in further, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a moment like this. Back in the studio, the energy was electric. The audience leaned in, sensing the sparks about to fly. Whoopi had dropped her smile. Her gaze was sharp, calculated. Joy Behar's expression turned sly, while Sunny Hostin gripped her pen like a sword. Then came the first blow. Whoopi leaned in, voice velvet smooth, but edged with steel. "All right, Mel, let's talk about this tax policy you're supporting. A 100% tariff on foreign films? Do you actually believe that's going to save Hollywood, or are you just trying to strangle global creativity?" The question hit hard. The audience murmured, some nodding along with the challenge. But Mel didn't blink. Sitting relaxed, hands lightly resting on the armrests, he met her stare head-on. His voice was calm but firm. "It's about protecting American jobs, Whoopi," he replied. "Hollywood isn't just about actors. It's 2 million working-class people, set designers, lighting crews, editors. We're fighting to keep their livelihoods alive." And just like that, the battle had begun. Mel Gibson fires back on The View, turns heated debate into an applause-worthy moment as the spotlight intensified on The View stage. The conversation between Mel Gibson and the host took a sharper, more charged turn. What began as a tense discussion quickly evolved into a passionate exchange about the future of Hollywood, globalization, and American jobs. Gibson, calm and composed, didn't hesitate. "When studios move production overseas to cut costs with cheap labor, American jobs vanish," he said firmly. "Just last year alone, we lost over 30,000 union jobs to foreign shoots. Tariffs aren't about isolation, they create fairness." His words were deliberate, each sentence slicing through the thick studio tension. The audience stirred, some whispering, others wide-eyed. Whoopi Goldberg leaned in, refusing to yield. "But Mel, you're a filmmaker. You know creativity thrives on open collaboration, not barriers. Tariffs raise production costs, hurt indie producers, and shrink choices for the audience. That's not exactly good for art, is it?" Her tone was biting, laced with skepticism, as if Gibson's ideas were relics from a forgotten era. But Gibson didn't flinch. A faint smile played on his lips, his eyes sharp. "Collaboration doesn't mean exploitation," he replied. "Independent producers are being drowned out because studios flood the market with cheap imports. Tariffs push those same studios to reinvest here, into American talent. Last year, 70% of major studio budgets went overseas. Keep that money here, and we create thousands of jobs on set, in post-production, across the board." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The silence was broken by a ripple of applause. Joy Behar pounced next, sarcasm dripping from her voice. "Sounds like you want to turn Hollywood into a museum, Mel. The world's global now, like it or not." Gibson turned to her, steady and composed. "Globalization doesn't mean abandoning our own workforce," he countered. "I've filmed around the world, Australia, Ireland, Mexico. I understand the value of collaboration. But when profit takes priority over people, that's where we need to draw the line. Tariffs are that line." The sharpness of his response caught Behar off guard. She glanced away, momentarily speechless. Sensing the shift, Goldberg came in again, her voice gaining force. "What about the audience, Mel? They want good movies. They don't care where they're made. Tariffs raise ticket prices. You think working families are going to thank you for that?" It was a strategic emotional strike, and the studio held its breath for Gibson's reply. He tilted his head slightly, eyes still locked on Goldberg. "Audiences deserve great films, But that starts with fair treatment for the people who make them, he said. If prices go up by a few cents to save thousands of jobs, I believe people will understand. But let's be clear, tariffs don't raise prices. They pressure studios to cut into their massive profits. Last year, the top 3 studio CEOs made over $200 million combined. Meanwhile, set workers are scraping by on temp contracts. So who's really hurting the audience, Whoopi? The audience erupted, this time with loud, sustained applause. Then Sunny Hostin, who had been quiet until now, entered the fray. Calm, composed, and calculated. Mel, you're focused on American jobs. But tariffs could trigger trade wars. Other countries may retaliate. Hollywood could lose its export markets. Have you thought about that? It was a precise, strategic hit. Gibson nodded, acknowledging the weight of her concern. I have, Sonny, and it's a valid point. But let's not pretend Hollywood is defenseless. We lead the world in cultural exports. We're not some fragile industry at the mercy of foreign governments. We innovate, we influence, we inspire, and we can do that while protecting our workers. Mel Gibson turns the tables on The View, and the audience can't get enough. $15 billion. That's how much American films generate overseas every year, Gibson said, his voice steady and sharp. Sure, other countries could retaliate, but let's be honest, they rely on our content more than we rely on theirs. Tariffs aren't about isolation. They're leverage. Strategic leverage. And when we reinvest in American production, Hollywood becomes stronger, not weaker. His words landed with precision. Sunny Hostin, who had launched the question with quiet intensity, now sat still, lips pressed together, momentarily outmaneuvered. The audience erupted in applause, stronger this time, with several audience members rising to their feet, energized and smiling. Whoopi Goldberg, sensing the tide was shifting, leaned in with a more aggressive tone. You sound passionate, Mel. I'll give you that. But let's be honest, this isn't your idea. It's Trump's. And everyone knows Trump doesn't give a damn about art. So, are you really fighting for workers? Or just playing mouthpiece for a president who couldn't care less? It was a sharp, personal jab meant to knock him off balance. But Gibson didn't flinch. Instead, he chuckled, calmly, even playfully. The kind of laugh that says, I saw that one coming. I'm no one's errand boy, Whoopi, he replied with cool confidence. I'm a filmmaker. I've dedicated my life to this industry. And if someone, anyone, puts forward policies that protect American jobs, I'll stand behind those ideas. Not because of who proposed them, but because of who they help, the millions of families who rely on this business. He motioned subtly toward the audience. And I think the people here tonight understand that. The studio lit up. The audience was now fully behind him, standing and cheering in waves, the applause echoing through the set. Behind the scenes, a producer's voice crackled through an earpiece, cut the feed. He's hijacking the segment. But the cameras kept rolling. Mel Gibson had not only held his ground, he had taken the offensive. His cool, unwavering delivery turned a coordinated ambush into a commanding performance. The energy in the room didn't fade. Even as the debate cooled, it left behind a charged atmosphere. Gibson sat poised, back straight, eyes focused, like a boxer who'd just come through a brutal round and was ready for the next. Whoopi Goldberg, though composed on the outside, now gripped the table tighter. There was a flicker of concern in her eyes, a silent acknowledgement that she was facing a formidable opponent. But she wasn't finished. Taking a slow breath, she dropped her voice to a serious tone. Mel, she began, her gaze narrowing. You keep talking about jobs and policy. But let's be real. You've been one of Trump's loudest defenders. A president many believe has done more to divide this country than anyone before him. So tell me, are you really proud to stand behind that? The room went still. A soft gasp rippled through the audience. The question had weight. It wasn't just political, it was personal. But Gibson met her gaze with calm defiance. A small, knowing smile flickered across his face, as if this question had been sitting at the top of his prep notes. I support anyone who puts Americans first, Whoopi, he said. Trump isn't perfect, no one is. But let's talk about results. Before the pandemic, unemployment hit a 50-year low, 3.5%. Black workers, women, minorities were seeing more job opportunities and stability than ever before. That's what matters. That's why I support policy, not personality. His answer was firm, grounded in data, and spoken like someone who had rehearsed it not just for debate, but because he believed it. The audience reacted with a mix of thoughtful nods and renewed applause. Whoopi leaned forward again, her voice sharpening. Mel Gibson holds his ground on The View as the debate takes a personal turn. But politics isn't just numbers, Mel. Goldberg pressed. Trump's words, his immigration policies, they've divided the country. Don't you see the damage he's done? Or are you just protecting your own wallet? It was a pointed, personal challenge designed to corner Gibson. A few audience members clapped in agreement. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. But Gibson remained composed. His fingers tapped lightly on the table as he glanced across the room, then back at Goldberg. Division doesn't come from one man, Whoopi, he said calmly. It comes from both sides. I've been all across this country, from small-town Ohio to the streets of LA. Most people don't care about political speeches. They care about jobs, safety, and a future for their families. If Trump delivers on that, I support the policy. But I've called him out too, especially over how he's handled the media. I'm not blind. He leaned in slightly, his voice lowering just enough to draw the crowd closer. But let me ask you, have you ever stopped to consider whether the show contributes to division? You rarely bring on people who disagree with you. That landed like a bomb. The audience burst into cheers and laughter. A man in the back stood, clapping, eyes lit with energy. Goldberg's expression tightened, clearly caught off guard by the counterpunch. Joy Behar jumped in quickly, trying to regain control. Oh, Mel, come on. Don't pretend you're neutral. You're Trump's guy, and we all know what that means. Outdated. Conservative. You want to drag us back to the past. Her tone was sharp, but her eyes revealed a flicker of unease. Gibson laughed softly. Joy, I'm not trying to turn back time. I want a country where people feel heard. Not manipulated by the media. Not dictated to by panels like this. I've been in film for over 40 years, and if I've learned anything, it's that real human stories, not politics, are what bring us together. I don't care about labels, Trump, Biden, whoever. I care about what helps real people live better lives. The audience clapped louder now, no longer hesitant, but moved. Sunny Hostin, watching carefully, seized her moment. Mel, she said, her voice calm but penetrating, you say you listen to the people, but Trump has often been accused of ignoring or alienating minority communities. As someone with a platform, don't you think you have a responsibility to speak up when he crosses a line? It was a well-aimed question, targeting both his influence and moral compass. The room fell quiet. Gibson nodded slowly. I do, Sonny. And I have spoken up. I've met Trump. I've disagreed with him, on social issues, on rhetoric. I've told him directly. But I've also seen the other side. Investment in underserved areas, new jobs in communities that were forgotten for decades. I'm not here to defend every move he makes. I'm here to ask people to judge by actions, not headlines. His voice was calm, but carried weight. Hostin didn't respond immediately, furrowing her brow as the audience again erupted in applause. A woman near the front raised her hand in silent support, eyes glistening. Sensing she was losing control of the narrative, Goldberg leaned forward, pressing harder. Mel, you talk a good game, she said. But you can't deny Trump has hurt a lot of people. By standing with him, you're picking a side. Don't you see how dangerous that is? It was a final, direct blow, an attempt to force a clear line. Gibson looked directly at her, his gaze steady. I'm not picking sides, Whoopi. I'm picking truth. And the truth is, every politician, left or right, has made mistakes. But we shouldn't let this show, or the media in general, tell people what to think. This audience is smarter than that. They want facts, not a script. He turned slightly, gesturing to the crowd. His voice softened but gained power, like a punch wrapped in velvet. They deserve better. We all do. The audience responded with thunderous applause. The mood had turned. Gibson wasn't just surviving the fire, he was controlling the room. Whoopi inhaled sharply, her expression sharpening. Joy Behar leaned forward, her expression sly. Sunny Hostin adjusted her glasses, scanning her notes for another opening. Then Goldberg delivered the deepest cut yet. Mel, she said slowly, her voice low and surgical, you talk a lot about truth. But here's another truth, your past. The headlines. Accusations of racism, anti-Semitism, and more. How can people trust someone with that history to stand here and defend American culture? The studio fell silent. A hushed gasp rippled through the room. All eyes turned to Gibson. Mel Gibson faces the fire, and fires back, all eyes locked on Mel Gibson. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his expression thoughtful, his silence deliberate. Then, his voice broke the stillness, low, measured, and full of quiet conviction. "I don't run from my past, Whoopi," he began. "I've made mistakes. I've said things I regret. There were moments I'm not proud of. But I've spent years, decades, learning, growing, and proving through my actions that I am not the man defined by those moments." He paused, scanning the audience slowly, as if inviting them to see him fully. "I made Hacksaw Ridge, a film about courage without violence. I made The Passion of the Christ, honoring the faith of millions. Those aren't just movies. They're reflections of who I've become." The audience sat in silence, many nodding subtly, their expressions softening. But Goldberg wasn't swayed. "Words are easy, Mel," she shot back. "But your past hurt real people, Jewish communities, people of color. You think making a few movies wipes that away?" Her voice was sharp, cold. The crowd stirred, some murmuring, a few applauding her challenge. Gibson met her glare with calm resolve. Not smug, not defensive, just grounded. "I'm not trying to erase the past, Whoopi. I've faced it. I've apologized, publicly. I've sat down with leaders from the communities I've hurt. I've worked to rebuild trust and do real good. But if we're talking about accountability, what about this show? You've defended controversial people before, even cited free speech. So why don't I deserve a chance to make things right?" The question landed hard. The contradiction hung in the air. Goldberg hesitated, her eyes flickering for just a moment. The crowd erupted, cheers, claps, even whistles. Someone shouted, "Let him speak." A man in the third row rose, clapping with passion. Joy Behar jumped in fast, trying to pull the reins. Her tone mocking, her arms crossed. "Come on, Mel. You said awful things. And now we're supposed to applaud you for changing?" The audience isn't that gullible. Gibson turned toward her, unshaken. "I'm not asking for applause, Joy. I'm asking to be judged fairly by what I've done since then. I've spent 40 years in this industry. I've worked with people of every background, funded projects for young Black directors in Atlanta, created opportunities behind the camera, not just in front of it. If you want to dig into my past, fine, but dig into the good, too. Or is it easier to just keep me boxed in as the villain?" His tone was firm, sincere. The response silenced Behar. She looked away, eyes darting to the side. Then came the loudest applause yet. It washed through the studio like thunder. A woman in the front row stood with tears in her eyes and raised her hand in quiet solidarity. Sunny Hostin, playing her usual role as the measured voice of reason, stepped in. "Mel, I respect your efforts," she said carefully, "but the audience needs consistency. How do we know this change is real and not just performance to protect your image?" It was a smart question. Sharp. The room fell silent again. Gibson nodded, his eyes earnest. "Consistency doesn't mean perfection, Sonny. It means showing up, even after failure. It means learning, growing, and not giving up on being better. I'm not acting. This isn't a script. This is my life. If anyone wants to know who I am, look at my work, the people I've supported, the stories I tell. I don't hide my flaws. I work through them and try to lift others along the way." His words hit like a promise. Hostin looked down, momentarily disarmed, unable to counter. The audience erupted once more, this time louder, fuller, rising to their feet. Applause filled the space, electrifying the atmosphere. Goldberg leaned forward, trying to seize back control, but her tone had lost its edge. "Mel, you keep talking about actions," she said, "but your past is still a shadow. You think the audience forgets just because you tell a few touching stories." It was a final shot, but one that lacked the force of her earlier jabs. Gibson turned to her, gaze steady, unwavering. Mel Gibson flips the script on The View, and the studio erupts. "I'm not asking this audience to forget, Whoopi," Gibson said, his voice calm yet resolute. "I'm asking them to see the whole of who I am, the mistakes I've made, the efforts to grow, and everything I've worked to build. If you choose to judge someone only by their worst moments, you deny the entire idea of redemption. And I believe this audience is smart enough to look past headlines and see deeper." The studio exploded with applause. The crowd stood, waves of cheers crashing through the room like thunder. Backstage, a producer whispered anxiously through an earpiece, "He's taken over the show." Goldberg's hands tightened around her cue cards, her eyes revealing the strain. Behar and Hostin sat in silence, exchanging uneasy glances. Mel Gibson, calm and unshaken, had transformed a cornered moment into a triumphant counterstrike. His presence now filled the studio, measured, composed, and burning with intensity. Goldberg regrouped, her voice dropping into a lower, sharper register. Mel, let's talk about the bigger picture. You support Trump. This is a man who's publicly attacked the media, threatened to sue the press. Some say he's a danger to free speech. You're a filmmaker. Doesn't that worry you? The room hushed. The audience leaned in. It was a direct challenge to his values, and everyone knew it. Gibson tilted his head slightly, eyes locked on Goldberg. A flicker of fire danced behind his gaze. Free speech is the soul of this country, Whoopi. I've seen it tested again and again, on film sets, in politics, in the press. But let's be honest, free speech doesn't mean you get to say anything without pushback. It means you get to speak, to be challenged, and to stand by your convictions. He paused, letting the weight settle before striking. I don't support everything Trump says or does, but I see a growing threat that's bigger than any one man. A media machine that selects facts like sound bites, twists narratives to fit an agenda, and calls it the truth. His voice was low but powerful. The room went silent, as if his words had vacuumed the air itself. Goldberg leaned in, her tone more pointed. Cherry-picking media? Mel, are you accusing us? This show invites debate. We ask tough questions. You can't seriously claim you're being silenced just because we challenge you. A few audience members clapped in agreement, sensing an opening. But Gibson's smile was slight, confident, like a master chess player lining up his final move. I welcome debate, Whoopi. I've faced tougher rooms than this. But what I see here isn't a debate, it's a script. You bring in voices that don't align with your views just to tear them down. I've watched this show. Conservative guests are rarely treated as equals. You call that free speech? He turned to the crowd, his voice steady and inclusive. The people here deserve real conversations, not curated takedowns. Let them hear both sides. Let them decide. The audience erupted again. Louder. Standing, clapping, some even whistling. The energy in the room had shifted, and it was undeniable. Joy Behar jumped in, sarcasm at the ready. Oh, please. Mel, don't play the victim now. We invited you. We gave you a platform. If you can't take the heat, maybe you shouldn't be in the kitchen. Mel Gibson exposes the view, turns live show into unforgettable moment. Joy Behar crossed her arms, her stare hard and unrelenting, trying to rattle Gibson. But Gibson met her eyes without flinching. Joy, I'm not afraid of the heat, he said, his tone steady. I've weathered controversy, taken fire from all directions, and I'm still here. But free speech doesn't mean bringing someone on just to make them a punchline. That's not a conversation. That's theater. He paused, then added with a faint smile. In fact, I brought a little something to make my point. He signaled toward the crew. The studio lights dimmed slightly, and a screen lit up behind him. A rapid-fire montage began to play. Clips from past episodes of The View, sharply edited, showing conservative guests being interrupted, ridiculed, and dismissed. Laughter at their expense, eye rolls, sarcastic barbs, all playing out for the audience to see. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman in the back row covered her mouth in disbelief. Whispers turned into murmurs. The final clip landed like a punch, a past episode showing Goldberg quipping, "What's free speech if we can't laugh in the face of wrong opinions?" The screen went dark. Gibson turned back to Goldberg, voice low but ringing with power. If that's free speech, Whoopi, if laughing in someone's face is what this show considers debate, then this isn't a platform for dialogue. It's a stage for scripted performance. And the audience deserves better. The studio erupted. Standing ovation. Applause pounded like rolling thunder. Some shouted his name. A man in the front row raised a clenched fist in the air, face lit with fierce approval. For the first time that hour, Goldberg looked visibly shaken. Her hands clutched her cards, her expression momentarily lost. Behar and Hostin exchanged nervous glances, the studio suddenly no longer theirs. Sunny Hostin tried to regain control, her tone calm but tinged with urgency. Mel, you're coming at us, but free speech includes the right to criticize. Isn't that what this show does, hold people accountable? It was a clever attempt to shift the narrative, but the crowd was already leaning too far in Gibson's direction. Gibson nodded, acknowledging the point, but he didn't let up. Criticism is fair, Sunny. But it should be real, not a choreographed ambush disguised as conversation. I've made movies long enough to know a story needs more than one viewpoint. A good film doesn't just follow the director, it explores every voice. This show could do the same, if you stop steering the narrative and let the audience decide for themselves. The crowd roared again, louder this time, feeding off his momentum. Hostin lowered her gaze, unable to form a response. Goldberg, sensing the moment slipping completely out of her grasp, made one last attempt. Mel, you talk about fairness, but you're defending a man who's called the media the enemy of the people. How do you square that with your so-called support of free speech? There was a slight tremble in her voice, an admission, perhaps, that she was down to her final shot. Gibson leaned forward, voice calm but commanding. I'm not defending anyone's insults, Whoopi. I'm defending the principle, the right to speak, the right to disagree, the right to be heard. If the media, or this show, wants to be a gatekeeper of truth, then open the gate. Let all voices in. Don't just preach openness, practice it. Because this audience doesn't need to be told what's right. They're smart enough to figure it out for themselves. He pointed gently to the crowd, his voice like a closing argument in a courtroom. The effect was seismic. The audience leapt to their feet, eyes gleaming, cheers echoing through the room. The air crackled with raw, unscripted energy, as if something real had just broken through the noise. Gibson sat tall, composed, a glint of quiet pride in his eyes. A man who had just walked through fire and emerged stronger. Whoopi Goldberg sat still, hands limp on the table, her gaze blank. Behar, visibly rattled, chewed her lip, silver hair slightly disheveled. Hostin, her notes crumpled, sat quietly, like a lawyer who had just watched her closing argument fall flat. In a last-ditch effort to regain composure, Goldberg cleared her throat and forced a thin smile. Well, thank you, Mel, for a lively discussion, she said weakly. Audience, what do you think? But the answer was already clear. The applause was for Gibson. Mel Gibson leaves the view in ruins, a final word that shook the studio. A woman in the front row shot to her feet, hand raised, eyes lit with fire as if Mel Gibson had just voiced the words she'd been waiting her whole life to hear. The applause erupted around her, sweeping through the studio like a tidal wave. Whoopi Goldberg lowered her head slightly, her expression faltering, eyes flickering with something she hadn't shown all episode: defeat. Gibson stood slowly, adjusting his suit with calm confidence. He scanned the audience with quiet sincerity, his voice steady, deep, and warm. Thank you for listening, he said. I didn't come here to argue. I came to remind us all that every voice matters. We have the right to speak, and the right to be heard. Keep searching for the truth. The studio ignited. Cheers exploded once more. Some in the audience chanted, Mel, Mel, as if a champion had just claimed victory. In that moment, he wasn't just an actor, he was a symbol of defiance in the face of media spin. Unable to contain herself, Joy Behar jumped in, her voice coated in sarcasm. Oh, Mel, you sure know how to work a crowd. But let's be real, we've got plenty more to say. She forced a smile, but her eyes told another story, one of desperation, like a performer realizing the scene had slipped from her control. Gibson turned slowly toward her, a glint in his eye. Joy, he said softly, I think the audience has said plenty. Laughter erupted across the studio, followed by another round of applause. Behar's smile faded as she looked away. Sonny Hostin, grasping for composure, offered a final olive branch. Mel, we respect your views. The View has always been a space for discussion. We hope you'll come back to continue the conversation. Her words were gracious, but her eyes hinted at something else: damage control. Gibson nodded with a kind smile. Sonny, I'll be back, if you're ready for a real debate. One where the truth leads, not the script. The crowd roared again. A spark had been lit, one that would ripple far beyond that studio. He stepped away from his chair, his stride firm, his gaze sweeping the room one last time. As he walked off stage, flashes of memory flickered in his mind. Those years of exile, the nights spent confronting himself, the long journey to reclaim his name. This wasn't just a moment of personal redemption. It was a statement. As he disappeared behind the curtain, the audience remained standing, applauding as if they couldn't let him go. A man near the back shouted, Thank you, Mel. The impact lingered like an aftershock. Backstage, panic spread. Who let that montage play? A producer barked into a headset, face flushed with panic. Do you realize what just happened? We're finished. Another crew member just shook their head in disbelief. He hijacked the show, turned it into his own movie. In the control room, screens flashed with breaking reactions. Social media exploded. Mel Gibson destroys The View. Whoopi gets schooled live, unscripted, unfiltered, unmatched. The team exchanged uneasy glances. They knew this episode wouldn't just go viral, it would become a cultural firestorm. Back on stage, the lights dimmed, but Goldberg sat motionless, hands resting limp on the desk. Her eyes stared into the distance, expression blank, like someone trying to comprehend what had just unfolded. The silence spoke louder than words. Mel Gibson didn't just win, he changed the game as the studio lights dimmed. Whoopi Goldberg sat in silence, haunted by a rare moment she couldn't control. In the early days of The View, she had been untouchable, able to pivot any discussion, redirect any narrative. But today, Mel Gibson had shattered that illusion. The script was gone. So was the control. Behind the table, Joy Behar leaned in, her voice a hushed tremble. "We underestimated him," she whispered to Sonny Hostin. Hostin gave a slow, defeated nod. Her fingers folded her now crumpled notes, the gesture saying what words couldn't. They had lost. As the audience began filing out of the studio, the energy didn't fade. It shifted. At the exit, a group of young women gathered, still wide-eyed. "I've never seen Whoopi silenced like that," one of them said, her voice tinged with awe. "She's right," another added, eyes locked on her phone. "We do need to hear both sides." Further back, an older man smiled proudly. "He didn't just win," he told his friend. "He made me rethink the whole media machine." The fire Gibson had lit inside the studio was only beginning to spread. Outside, in the streets of New York, Mel Gibson stepped into the afternoon light. Sunlight struck his face as he exhaled, calm, composed, like a man who had completed a long-awaited mission. But inside ABC's headquarters, the mood was anything but calm. In the control room, chaos erupted. "Who authorized that clip to air?" A producer shouted, red-faced, into a headset. "We're done." He turned our show into his platform. Another technician shook their head. "He hijacked The View. We didn't see it coming." And now, the fallout was going viral. Within minutes of the episode ending, social media exploded. Millions of posts flooded timelines. One viral tweet read, "Mel Gibson just burned The View to the ground. Who's still calling him washed up?" A TikTok clip of Gibson's montage takedown gained traction instantly. Another user posted, "Whoopi tried to trap him." Gibson got the whole studio on its feet. Memes flooded every platform. One showed a triumphant Gibson with the caption, "Truth. 1. The View. 0. Another featured a stunned Goldberg under the line, "When you lose on your home turf." Reaction channels capitalized fast. YouTube videos with titles like "Gibson destroys The View in 5 minutes" racked up millions of views within hours. One TikToker reenacted the montage scene, adding booming sound effects and explosions. The comments poured in. "I never liked Mel Gibson, but now? Fan for life. The View just shot itself in the foot, and Mel pulled the trigger." Some users even dug through years of past View episodes, reposting clips where conservative guests had been cut off, mocked, or sidelined, strengthening Gibson's argument about bias. Then came the press. Reuters ran with Mel Gibson versus The View, a historic breakdown of control. Variety headlined, "Mel Gibson didn't just win the argument, he exposed the format." Fox News, predictably, cheered, "Gibson teaches The View what free speech really looks like." Even traditionally centrist outlets like The Washington Post called the episode a media reckoning, noting that Gibson's quote, "The audience deserves more than a scripted drama," had become a viral rallying cry. Back at ABC, the boardroom had turned into a war zone. An internal memo leaked to Deadline read, "We underestimated Gibson. This is The View's biggest crisis in a decade." Advertisers panicked. Within 24 hours, 3 major sponsors pulled out: cosmetics, a food brand, and a tech partner, all citing brand risk. A marketing executive told Variety, "The audience is turning. The blowback is real. We can't take the heat." And in a quiet corner backstage, Goldberg, Behar, and Hostin sat in stunned silence, surrounded by echoes of the moment they had lost the room, and maybe the narrative. Mel Gibson's View showdown, a media reckoning that sparked a cultural shift in the aftermath of what many are calling one of the most seismic moments in daytime television. Whoopi Goldberg, usually composed and in command, retreated behind closed doors. Refusing media inquiries, she reportedly felt betrayed by the very audience she had long believed was on her side. A close source revealed that, for the first time, Goldberg wasn't just shaken by a guest, but questioning the show's own handling of the Mel Gibson episode. Joy Behar, never one to back down, fired off a terse tweet, "We just did our job. People need to calm down." Within minutes, she was flooded with backlash, accused of being a sore loser by thousands of commenters across Twitter and Instagram. Sonny Hostin, typically the voice of measured restraint, remained publicly silent. But according to Page 6, she privately admitted she regretted not preparing better. While The View descended into chaos, Mel Gibson was on a different stage entirely, this time in Los Angeles, promoting his new film. He was welcomed like a returning hero. The applause was thunderous. One fan held a sign that read, "Mel, thank you for speaking for us." Gibson offered no direct comment about the View controversy, but when asked in a brief Variety interview, he responded with quiet clarity. "I didn't come to destroy anyone. I came to remind people that truth is always worth fighting for." That quote alone was shared millions of times. In less than 24 hours, Gibson had transformed from a controversial Hollywood veteran to a symbol of courage and conviction. Online, a movement erupted. A Facebook page titled Mel Gibson, Truth Defender, surged to tens of thousands of members in a single day. His words on tariffs, media narratives, and the right to be heard were dissected, celebrated, and remixed across platforms. Critics of The View pulled archival footage highlighting its long-standing pattern of cutting off conservative guests, validating Gibson's claim that the show had become more spectacle than discussion. Efforts by The View supporters to frame Gibson as simply playing the victim were drowned out in a flood of viral momentum. One user captured the shift in sentiment perfectly. "Gibson didn't just beat The View. He forced us to question the media." Even traditional media outlets were forced to confront the moment. Reuters ran a headline, "Mel Gibson versus The View, a cultural fault line." Variety wrote, "Gibson didn't just win. He unmasked the bias." The Washington Post, typically centrist, acknowledged, "Gibson's appearance signals a shift in how audiences engage with dissent." Fox News, of course, hailed it as a triumph. Gibson schools The View on what free speech really means. Inside ABC, the fallout was immediate. A leaked memo shared with Deadline revealed that viewership had dropped 15% in the week following the episode, enough to rattle executives and spark internal meetings. Sponsors, ranging from beauty brands to food companies, began quietly pulling out. A marketing executive told Variety, "The audience is turning on the show. We can't afford to stay attached." ABC initiated emergency media ethics training, emphasizing the need for respectful dialogue with opposing viewpoints. Meanwhile, some longtime fans expressed their disappointment. One popular Instagram post read, "I love The View because it felt real. But today, it just felt scripted, and Mel tore that script in half." Backstage, Goldberg remained quiet. Sources say she spent hours reading online reactions, processing why the audience had turned. While she didn't publicly acknowledge defeat, she reportedly began advocating for more ideologically diverse guests, a quiet but telling shift. Behar, still vocal, continued defending the show but with noticeably softened rhetoric, calling for real dialogue over debate. Sunny Hostin, in a rare CNN appearance, simply stated, "We've learned something important. The audience wants fairness, and we have to listen." Meanwhile, Gibson kept moving forward, his film suddenly receiving unprecedented attention, screenings sold out across the country. For many, seeing his film wasn't just about the story on screen. It was about supporting the man who stood alone and challenged the system. The Hollywood Reporter wrote, "Gibson doesn't just tell stories, he confronts power." His View appearance was a script-flipping reminder of what happens when truth walks into a room full of narratives. Back home in Malibu, standing on his balcony overlooking the Pacific, Gibson reflected not on fame or controversy, but on the road that led him back from exile. Years ago, Hollywood turned its back on him. Today, he walked through that fire and emerged as something more than a celebrity. He became a voice. According to a close friend who spoke with Deadline, Mel never wanted to destroy The View. He wanted to challenge it to be better. And in some ways, he succeeded. The Gibson moment is now being taught in journalism classes, dissected in YouTube breakdowns, and debated on talk radio. Professors and political analysts alike refer to the Gibson effect, the ability of one individual, armed with sincerity and clarity, to force a massive media institution to look inward. An NYU professor told the New York Times, "Gibson reminded us that audiences aren't passive, they're paying attention. They know spin when they see it." As dusk fell over The View's quiet studio, its stage empty, lights dimmed, the contrast was clear. In Hollywood, Gibson stood on another stage, welcomed by roaring crowds. On one side, a shaken media empire. On the other, a man who reminded America that honest voices still matter. The legacy of that confrontation wasn't about ratings or headlines. It became something far more enduring. a call for fairness in media, for truth without filters, and for the right of every voice to be heard. In an era fractured by polarization, bias, and scripted outrage, Mel Gibson didn't just spark a moment. He sparked a movement. And in doing so, he became something rare in today's culture. An imperfect man who stood up anyway, not just for himself, but for everyone who still believes in the power of truth. Prepare with purpose. Face the truth head-on, and let every challenge become a chance to grow. Just as Mel Gibson owned his past and chose action over excuses, you too can rebuild trust through sincerity and consistency. And as he reminded the nation, seek truth relentlessly. Enter every debate with facts, not fury. Let respect, not outrage, guide your voice. In a country founded on free speech, use that freedom not to divide, but to connect. Speak boldly, like the audience that rose in support, not just of a man, but of fairness, accountability, and balance. Subscribe now to never miss powerful moments like Mel Gibson's unforgettable showdown on The View. Thanks for watching, and join us next time as we dive into more game-changing media moments that shape our world.